So, a brief introduction to myself. So my name is Richard Jackson. I was the Head of Sustainability for the Olympic Delivery Authority, and the Olympic Delivery Authority was the organisation set up by the UK government to help deliver the design and the construction of the venues and the park for the Olympic Games. I was involved in the project from 2004, before we won the right to host the Games, right the way through to 2011. So I left before we actually hosted the Games, but by then my job was largely complete. We delivered the venues for the Games on time and on budget, as we originally committed to do. And I suppose my role started by looking at how do we support the bid in terms of sustainability. So what do we as London 2012 want to commit to in terms of delivering a sustainable Olympics? And so I worked very closely with the bid team, which then became LOCOG, in preparing a bid document. And obviously once we were successful in winning the bid, and all of the excitement that goes with that, our next big challenge was to turn that into a sustainability strategy for the actual construction project that we were going to deliver over the period 2005 to 2011. So it was an incredible challenge for me. I will say also that from the point of view of somebody now watching the Olympics, both in terms of what's happening in Brazil, but also in terms of what's happening in Tokyo, I'm incredibly excited by Tokyo. Okay, so I suppose as I say, the first challenge for us was to establish a sustainable development strategy for the project. And it was important with that strategy for us to think about the cost of delivering sustainable development with such a major project, the ability to deliver some of the requirements of that strategy. So we wanted a project which achieved absolute best practice, but we also wanted to make sure we could deliver a resilient site so it was able to host the Games. So we need to consider resilience, we need to consider robustness, cost, and the practicalities of delivering what we set out in that strategy. And we based the strategy around 12 objectives, 6 objectives around the environment, and 6 objectives around society and improvement to society. So that's things like jobs, training, skills, new housing, and engagement with the community. And in developing that strategy, we thought a lot about what are the targets we want to commit to, and we also thought about how we're going to monitor whether we've been successful or not. Once we had agreed what the strategy might look like, our next job was then to get approval from our own committees, the board of the Olympic Delivery Authority, but also to get approval from the UK government. And it was important that because it was public money, that we got UK government approval for the strategy. And so we took the strategy to UK government, and they approved the strategy in late 2006, and we launched the strategy in 2007. So that became, for us on the design and construction project, our strategy. And what I think is really important about the strategy is the fact that, one, we set some very clear targets. We said we want to reduce carbon emissions by 50%, we want to reduce water consumption by 40%, we want to minimise waste. So we put numbers to targets, and that was important because that sent a signal to the market, to the construction companies, of what we want to achieve. And it's that kind of certainty that we were, the construction companies told us they needed. They wanted to know exactly what we wanted to achieve, and they could then gear up to be able to deliver against that. And I think that also set the tone for the way we wanted to work with construction companies, which is a much more collaborative process. We want to build a relationship with these companies because they're going to deliver for us. They have the knowledge, they have the workforce, they have the history of delivering big projects. And what they wanted from us was clear targets. They wanted a sharing of risk. And so we looked at how we might share risk between the companies. And we built, I would say, almost a one-team approach to delivery. And I suppose some examples of how we felt we worked with the construction companies are things like setting the policy. We had regular liaison with all of our construction company directors, and it's through that liaison we were able to review performance against the targets. We were able to review performance against our safety requirements, and we were also able to look at what we're learning on the project. So we're able to share lessons learned and learn by that. And that was a really important part of this, is that actually as we go through this, we want to be able to, we know we're probably going to make some mistakes, but we want to learn from those mistakes and make sure we don't make the mistakes again. So that was an important part of that relationship, that collaborative relationship with the construction companies. And I suppose the other part is we know that we needed to manage the performance of the contractors, the construction companies, and where performance wasn't good enough, we know we had to be a client, so we had to make sure that if it wasn't good enough, we told them it wasn't good enough. On the other hand, where the performance was really good, we wanted to reward that. And so we set up schemes where we could reward and recognise really good practice. And from the sustainability point of view, what that meant was that we rewarded individuals who did things that were really exceptional on those projects. So we had one or two individuals who decided that they wanted to take responsibility for managing waste, and they would, within their projects, they would be the individuals responsible for recycling various parts of waste for those projects, and we rewarded that. But we also then had set up an annual award scheme, so our Health, Safety and Environment Awards, which was a big dinner that we hosted. We invited all the construction companies, and it was our chance to be able to thank the teams that achieved the most against various criteria. So on the site, around sustainability and around environment, health and safety, we had a monthly meeting with all of our project directors, and that, as I say, was an opportunity for us to be able to share performance with them, and really to kind of highlight where we've found poor performance, why that was happening, what we're going to do about it, but also to highlight some of the good things that we were seeing on the site. And when you look at a project of this scale, what we were dealing with was firstly the demolition of a number of buildings. We had to remediate a site which was heavily contaminated, so we had all of the issues around soil, health associated with undertaking those works. And then we start the construction of the venues itself, and it was, because it was a very tight site with lots of waterways around it, it was a very complex site for managing. Yeah, I mean, the Olympic Delivery Authority was a new organisation, and so what we didn't really have with it was the history of relationships with a supply chain, with contractors, and with other organisations. And I think one of the things that we realised very early on was we need to have good partnerships with lots of different organisations in order to work more effectively. So we worked with an organisation called the Environment Agency, and the Environment Agency is the UK's regulatory body for environmental issues like land contamination, flood risk, water management, and the way we set out that relationship was to have a small team from the Environment Agency based on site with our teams, so we could have regular discussions about managing big environmental issues, agree a way forward, and then make sure that we put that into operation. And that worked really effectively. It meant that we didn't have to send off lots and lots of forms to the Environment Agency and then wait a long time to get an approval, and what it meant that we could get approval almost immediately to progress with works. So that relationship was really important. We also built a relationship with an organisation called WRAP, and that's the Waste and Resources Action Programme. It's a government body, and they've been set up to promote waste or minimising waste, maximising recycling, and also maximising reuse of materials. And what we wanted them on site was to help us minimise the amount of construction waste that we might be generating. And we used their tools to be able to manage a lot of our waste out of our projects, and we were very successful at doing that. So yes, we built a lot of relationships with lots of different parties, and we were very keen to bring them in to work with us, and it was one of the key factors in delivering sort of the success. When we talk about community, there's lots of different communities that we need to think about. Certainly in terms of sustainability, we have the local community who might be interested in things like noise, dust, nuisance, and so we need to make sure we kind of engage with them early. We then got this large sustainability community, which could be NGOs, Greenpeace, WWF, and it was important for us to kind of think about how do we engage with them, because they're going to be interested in the targets that we set, and also interested in how we manage, say, the environmental impacts of the project. And then we obviously have things like the government community, and they're interested in, obviously, this is public money, so are we spending this responsibly, and also are we delivering outcomes which have a society benefit, so they have a benefit for the UK. And with each of those community groups, we have sort of different ways of liaising with them. With the local community, we had regular forums, 4 forums with our 4 main local community groups. And that was an opportunity for us to share some of the main construction works that were coming forward over 3 months. So we would talk about whether there was going to be works in the ground, what type of works, and then also talk about the impacts that they might see from outside of the Olympic Park. So that might be increased vehicles, that might be about, there might be some more noise, there might be some higher cranes and so forth. And as part of that, we also talk about what mitigation we have in place. So if there is a likelihood of increased dust because it's the summer months, then we would talk about how we would manage the dust so that actually they wouldn't be as affected. With our sustainability stakeholders, we worked with the Commission for Sustainable London, and the Commission was set up to audit the London 2012 organisations in terms of delivery of the sustainability targets, but they were also set up to help manage a wealth of sustainability stakeholders, and their role was really to be able to engage with the likes of the NGOs like Greenpeace, and to talk to them about what they were finding from the project, how we as ODA and LOCOG were doing against our targets, and also to represent them when they spoke to us. So we kind of managed some of our stakeholders through the Commission for Sustainable London, and they played a really important role in limiting how much exposure we had to these organisations. Not that we wouldn't want the dialogue, but actually, I suppose in some ways the important part was we had to get on and deliver a job. We had a job to do. Okay, so I would say first thing is that most of the companies, if not all of the companies who are working on the Olympic project, I think were inspired by the Olympics, by the fact that they were working on the Olympics project. And you, as you walked around the site and you talked to workers, you got this sense that they were excited to be part of something really big, and the games that happened a couple of years ago, the feeling for me in the UK was all of a sudden people were really pleased that the games were being held in London. It was amazing. But go back to 2006, as we were preparing our sustainable development strategy, what we wanted to do was engage early with all of our different suppliers. And so we worked with an organisation called the Construction Products Association that are based in London, and we set up a series of workshops. And what we did was we invited contractors and suppliers to all of these workshops. And the idea of the workshops was really to start to set out what our goals were, some of the challenges on the site, and what we expected from the suppliers. And that was, as you kind of rightly asked, that was an important part of the project, because it allowed companies to start to think about what they needed to do to win contracts with us. And as part of the procurement process, we made it clear that sustainability was going to be an important factor when we judged who would win the contracts. And so as a result of that, we were expecting people to not just achieve our targets, but to demonstrate how they might be able to go beyond the targets. And for us, our job was to deliver the site, so that's the 5 permanent venues, the temporary venues, the infrastructure for the site, and if you've watched this on television, you'll have seen the huge parklands as well. So our job was to deliver that site. And low-cog were then going to be coming really from 2010 onwards to almost establish the overlay. So this was more of the temporary facilities for the games itself, and then obviously hosting the games. So that was about sort of the television cameras, the movement of athletes around not just the site but around the city. There obviously were areas where we needed to work very closely, in particular managing our various contractors on the Olympic Park site. We needed to make sure right at the start that whatever we were designing was suitable for low-cog, so we needed to kind of have an engagement with them around the design of the venues, making sure the specifications were right for the games itself, and that was an important area of working between us. From sustainability, in terms of our overall approach, we wanted to kind of have consistency between our sustainable development strategy and the overall 2012 sustainability strategy. And so it was important that what our 12 headline objectives kind of fit into the 5 overall strategic aims of the Games. Now, in terms of working with low-cog, that meant that we co-located with them in the same building. And one of the things we learned from talking to various other cities that had hosted the Games was that it was really important to build a very strong relationship between low-cog and the construction parties. So we felt by co-locating, having regular liaison, that was really important. And it did mean that if issues arose, then we were able to sit down and talk about those issues and resolve them fairly quickly. It didn't mean you had to have lengthy train journeys to go and meet your counterpart in another building. So that was important. The second thing is about that regular liaison, and we worked pretty much so that we had monthly meetings between the ODA and low-cog, and it allowed us to share where we were going, any sort of joint issues we were able to look at and consider, and work out the best way forward. And a good example of that is in 2010, we announced that we were unable to bring forward the wind turbine as part of one of our projects, and that was going to have an impact on our carbon emission targets, but it was also going to have an impact on the overall aims of the Games around carbon emissions. And so it's important that the two parties work together to look at what alternatives do we have. So do we have other options for delivering carbon reduction? How might we deliver those other options? And how do we then present this to a wide range of stakeholders? In particular, the Commission for Sustainable London, who were obviously very keen to know how we were going to meet our targets that we set out. And what we did was we identified an alternative means of delivering carbon emissions with low-cog, which was acceptable to some of our main stakeholders. And that was an important piece of joint working between the two parties. So you know, there was a lot of activity going on between us, but it was important that, I suppose, in some ways, that it's about building the relationships and the trust between people. Well, I mean, I suppose if I was talking not just to Tokyo, but to anybody who's doing a construction project, a big construction project now, for me, the important lessons that I certainly learned was being clear about what you want to achieve. So having a good, clear strategy with targets which are clear, they're qualitative, so they're numbers, and they send then a signal as to what you want your contractors to work towards. It's also then easier to measure against real targets as opposed to a sort of ambiguity. So that's the first thing, good clear policies and strategies. Second thing is, I think, about the processes that you put in place. And what we did in the ODA was not just have the strategy, but we put in a number of processes around delivering that strategy, making sure we had good training for people, we had good governance structures, so we had a sustainability board, we had various committee meetings, so we were able to track the targets that we set out. We had a monthly reporting process, so we required all of our contractors to report against the targets on a monthly basis, and then we were able to look at how we were doing against our overall targets regularly. And it did mean that instead of waiting until the end of a project to see whether you've been successful or not, you actually know, because you're able to track sort of month by month as to how you're doing, and you're able to also then mitigate if there is a problem. So that was really important. So the second thing for me is about having a really good management system for whatever you set out in your strategy. My third thing in terms of the lesson is about collaboration. That as we learned, there's a wealth of knowledge outside of the organisation that we sat in. We were a very small organisation, or comparatively small organisation, of about 250, 300 people. And so it's important for us to use the knowledge from lots of different organisations and to bring them in to help us. And so, as I've talked about, we work with the Environment Agency, with RAP. We also work with WWF. We work with a group called Bioregional, which is a small sustainability NGO in the UK. And all of those parties, helped us to deliver a successful, sustainable games. So collaboration, I think, is another thing that we learnt. And then probably the final thing is about engagement. Early engagement. So you're talking to people early about what you want to achieve, and then continual engagement. So you're constantly looking at what you're learning and sharing those lessons back. And as we completed the work in 2011, 2012, we started a process called the Learning Legacy. And the Learning Legacy is about capturing all of the lessons that we learned on the project and putting these into documents, into videos, and storing these all online. So online now there is the London 2012 Learning Legacy, and that has a lot of the information about the London Games and what we learned, both good and bad.